what is the advice that we give to a pitcher in the bottom of the ninth when everything's on the line? And just breathe, relax. Why? If it's that important, it's at the end of the game at that time, don't you think we should practice it?
All right, let's kick it off. Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Haase, and we are live here with episode 12 of ITTV with Lantz Wheeler. Before we kick it off and get into introducing him and kind of diving in, wanted to do a few kind of roll call things and getting everything out of the way. So I've always got my little notebook here to remind me of everything because we're live and things happen. So again, we're going to get into Lantz. Make sure if you are wanting to follow us or curious where the heck we are elsewhere, if you're not on Instagram or Facebook, we're just at Indiana Twins across the board, youtube.com/Indiana Twins. Try to make it simple for you. If you want to email us with any questions before, now, or after, you can just email indianatwins@gmail.com. So again, pretty simple. And just a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. So we're going to talk breathing. We're going to talk movement, competition, coaching, and we're going to get into some of what Lantz does, as well as some of his, or one of his products that I'm really excited to talk about. It's not meant to be a sales pitch. It's meant to just be a highlight because it's something we use. And if we can answer any questions and just kind of talk a little bit about it, I think it's a fantastic product. So with that said, Lantz, before I ask you some of the toughest questions ever, sarcasm, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background, your baseball career, and let's kick it off.
Oh, all right. Started coaching started coaching in high school. Played 2 years of junior college, went to Morehead State, and started coaching high school with a buddy of mine, and then in junior college in 2003 in St. Catherine. From there on to Lipscomb, spent there 3-4 years, on to ULM, and then came back, went to Nashville, and now live in Huntington Beach. So it's been quite a ride, man.
Yeah. All over the place. So what made you transition from the coaching gig to more the instruction and running the Pitchapalooza, which we'll talk about later? What was that transition like?
The biggest part was missing the scoreboard, man. Competing against that scoreboard in the locker room, the relationships was always really big to me. So that was a transition, but it was something I loved to do because it was the development side that I was really fascinated with. Had a chance to go from college to working with some MLB clients with my good friend Hunter Bledsoe. And from there, man, just kind of dug in. But Palooza, man, like everything I've done, was a total accident. It wasn't because I'm smart. It was because I just happened to think of something. And with Palooza, how it started was in 2013. And each year as a college coach, I would go out and I would visit what I thought were some of the better coaches where I saw something new they were doing. I always liked to learn as much from everybody that I could. And so once 2013 hit and there was no longer college baseball, I think it was like October, and I'm sitting there in the living room and I tell my wife, Mandy, I'm like, you know what, we should just have some guys over. We'll just call it Pitchapalooza. So I invited my buddies. I think it was Butch Thompson, it was Zan, it was Paul Nyman, it was Dave Serrano, Tony Robichaux, and I think we had 49 people there that first year. But, you know, the cool thing about Palooza, it's not so much – there's some great speakers, but they're selfless. But more importantly, man, it's the conversations outside and the ideas I grasp from that always just keeps me going.
Yeah. I know, because the first time I went to Palooza was 2015, and I'm pretty sure that I had seen a lot of your stuff online and then just kind of came across that. And, I mean, it just – was kind of a no-brainer from a sense of, well, I might not have had the money at the same time because I just moved to Indy not too long ago. I ended up kind of asking my high school coach, like, hey, what do you think about this? Is there any money in the program? So he was able to kind of fork over some money because it's not the most expensive thing in the world, but I was like, I'm poor right now. So he was able to pay for that. And then just, I think would have been less than a year later, you would come up with a coach's certification that you wanted to do, which is all the rage now. Everyone's doing coach's certifications.
Yeah.
But that was when I'd actually met you first in person. It was a small group. I think it was 20, 30 guys, and it was amazing because it was this guy that I've been following that I really, respected and looked up to. And to get in and just get, down and dirty with all the details for a couple of days, it was a fantastic time. Just getting more chance to get to know you a little bit. So that was kind of when we had first met, and then just kind of kept in loose contact over the years. I've been to, I think, 4 out of the last 5 Paloozas, so it's fantastic. So I know some of the listeners are going to find it kind of cool. I've been asking this question of a lot of guys in pro ball. with as much exposure as you've had with working with guys in pro ball and being at spring training and all those types of things, what's been the coolest, like, not aha necessarily, but like wow moment, or maybe not that you had made it, but like I'm sitting next to this guy, or I'm teaching this guy, or I got a phone call from this person. What's that been like?
Oh, yeah. You know what I would have to say would be in 2014 when my little boy, he was 3 at the time, was decked out in full Cubs uni. And he was out there throwing on the field with 2 guys. It was Neil Ramirez and Justin Graham. I was like, you know what, that's pretty cool, because so much of what I do, it's simply more so just to get him involved, man, for us, something for us to do. So that's always been the coolest part, is to be able to share it with him.
Yeah, I remember watching those videos, and I love when he gets geared up for everything, doesn't he?
Everything. Yeah, you know, I've learned more about pitching from my kids probably than that and skateboarding than I have anything else. Just watching those guys, it's amazing.
Yeah, my son Max turns 1 next week, and from watching all your videos of Rex and everything, I've already started trying to do like little pitching lessons. He only throws underhand right now, but it's been fun.
You know what I learned with them, I don't want to get off topic. Please tell me if I am. But I realized early on that the reason guys that throw like girls is because of they're throwing like their dad, because their dad throws like girls to them. And I noticed that with my oldest now, and I guarantee you, it's probably my guarantee to her that she would never play baseball, because I actually tried to coach her. But I would get down and I would just barely throw it like I was shooting basketball. And here's this little girl that has no motor skills to catch it. So she's imitating what she believes is the most important, and the baseball coach. So she starts throwing it like that. I'm like, quit throwing it like that. But yeah, the little ones is cool. So whenever you're working with him and you're trying to get him to catch, we always started with a balloon and dropped it over his head. Then we took the string away. And then whenever we were throwing a baseball, I would get on one knee so he wouldn't associate me doing this to him. He actually knew it was something different. So you asked me earlier what got me diving into this stuff. A lot of it was after the kids were born and just kind of seeing the stuff and just relating everything back to pitching.
No, because I've never forgotten that. I've always been excited for when Max gets older, before I even had him. But what was that, just instinctive, or did you kind of pick up on something? I mean, you said everything's an accident, but where did that come from, where you just said, let's start with this and progress from the balloon on? You
know what? I think it was, 1, I noticed it with my oldest daughter, but 2, I have a younger brother that's 15 years, and he was kind of like my guinea pig. And I noticed that sometimes I found myself over coaching. And then 2, a big one was Paul Nyman's work. Like, I found his stuff and I was just like, holy crap, there's so much I don't know. And he just forced me to look at it a little bit differently. That was about the time too, intention. Everybody talked about intention and doing this. But yeah, that was a big part of it too. And then from there, just other discoveries that you'll find.
Yeah. So I was curious to kind of dive in from an instructing standpoint, because, you know, you host Pitchapalooza, you work with a lot of elite athletes, pro guys, you work with younger guys. What's one of the first things you do when you meet a guy, like when you're instructing with them?
Yeah, before I'm instructing anybody, I'm going to get a pretty extensive survey, because to me, it's all about the human element. It's about building that relationship. It's getting to know these guys. And so over the past, 6 years or so, I've just been using surveys and questions. And here's why. It's because I was working with this kid one day, and he was going through the drills. He couldn't get his hips to rotate through. So we'd go through these drills. I'm like, man, you're doing those drills really good. So we'd step on the mound and right back to the same stuff. I'm like, oh, we need more drills right here. So we'd go back, we'd do more drills. Before you know it, it's probably been 40 minutes. He steps back on the mound, still the same thing. So I'm thinking, what could this be? So I stepped out of my pitching coach shoes and stepped into some common sense shoes. And I said, hey, man, are you trying to finish in fielding position? He's like, yeah, that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Hey, don't finish in fielding position. Perfect. So from that point forward, I was like, you know what, this data is great, but that tells me what, it doesn't tell me why. And so I starting with questions. And the first one that I'll ask is, if your career came down to one pitch, what would that pitch be? So you take a guy that throws a 12-6 curveball. He's pretty good at it. So he's going to have a higher arm slot. Because he has a higher arm slot, he's going to be more stable on the foot. Because he's thrown that pitch in some big situations, got some big outs, he's got an emotional attachment to it. A lot of times you'll see guys with curveballs started with that very early, got him out of some big situations, because every hitter struggles with the curveball. And then so they started to throw it more often because they had the more success. They started to believe in it because they believed in it. They practiced it even more. So it's really most of what we've got to look at when it comes to mechanics is really that's a series of movements. And movements, thoughts, emotions, they're all so highly integrated and so interconnected in the brain that you can't have one without the other. Another one is, to me, that's very important, is just asking the pitcher, hey, if you were teaching mechanics, what would be 2 or 3 things that you would share with somebody else that's really important? If you were doing pitch shaping, what would be 2 or 3 things? Because that gives you insight to what they believe. What they believe, they see as the truth, so that's what they're going to practice. What they're practice is what they're going to do. So it's all integrated. It's all coming back. There's always an easier way to chase the why. But to me, we focus on the pitcher. We never get to know the player or his athletic ability, and we definitely don't focus on the person himself. And that's just so important because that's the driver of the machine right there. And that's what often has showed up in pitch mechanics. Then the last one would be, what cues do you use? You think about baseball, we play a rotational sport. We're measuring rotational metrics, and then we're using linear cues to coach them. Stay back, stay tall, reach out, get extension. So you think about that is that you show me a taller kid that's been taught to stay tall, and I'll show you a kid that's with a very average lower half or probably struggles to use his lower body simply because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember sitting in that room in 2016 with the certification and hearing you talk about things in such simple language like that, like you rotate and you go straight and just you simplified so many things. And I don't remember if I wrote it down or told you, but I was just like, why is no one else speaking in simple layman's terms like of things that just make complete sense? So my challenge question is because I know when you run clinics or camps or weekend things, you've got a big group of guys, and I'm sure you work with team settings too. So how does that challenge you or kind of constrain you to get to know those guys?
Because I think so much about coaching is communicating. It's not telling somebody how to do anything. It's really a guided discovery. So let me use my little boy for an example. Is that he's 9 and he'll be 10 in May. And last month was the first time that we actually worked on something together. Before then, what I've always done with him was just kind of constrain the variables around the goal in order to get what he wanted to do. So, for example, if I wanted him to throw harder, I would have him try to break something. If I wanted him to throw sidearm, I would ask him to skip a rock. So I was just changing around the environment to get him to do what I wanted to do. But with players, so much about players is, I think, number one, that survey gives me really good insight to what's important to them. What's their goal? What have they struggled with? What are all these emotional factors? If you had 3 questions, what would those questions be? So it gives me a chance to prepare, but also looking at that gives you insight to, the personality. What does this kid do? How often does he take pitching lessons? How many different pitching coaches? Because all of those are going to leave different footprints. Another one is, who do they follow on social media? Because all of that stuff will be reflected in the movement patterns because it's through beliefs and intentions and learnings. So that's all. So that's just a big melting pot. So to answer your question, number one, when kids come in or players come in, I mean, we've literally had 9-year-olds with big league players because it's still all the same. Because how we're going to start off, we're going to just discuss, like, what are some of the things that you can control? Let's forget about everything else. The first thing that we'll do when we sit there is, man, I'll hand them a piece of paper and I'll say, how many of you guys want to know your potential? And they, of course, going to raise their hand. So I said, all right, here's a pen and a piece of paper. You've got this piece of paper right here. I want you to draw a circle use as much room as you like, representing your chances to be the best pitcher at your select age group. Because that gives me insight to how they see themselves, how they believe to see themselves. Because belief to me is the ultimate source of potential. Because once I take those beliefs, I'm only going to be as good as I can believe that I can be. If I reach a certain level in development and I don't believe I can do it, I'm not going to put in the work necessary to do it because I don't believe I can do it anyway. Why waste my time? So then we'll take that circle of belief and we'll just start to insert everything that's inside our control. What can we control that matters? Because really if you want to change an output, the quickest way is to change the input. So what are we putting into our circle each day? And we're looking at it from a physical standpoint. We're looking at it from a practice standpoint. We're looking at it from a nutrition standpoint because we can't talk velocity. And I've done this 9-week program, but then I stayed up all night playing Fortnite, drinking Mountain Dew, and I haven't eaten anything. So why is my velocity down? Oh, it must be mechanics. But that's kind of how we're just conditioned to think that way. So it's breaking away some of those beliefs and looking at that it's a lot more simple, and who cares what anybody besides you is doing. It doesn't matter. Player development is about developing you, So let's focus on you. What can you do? And then again, once they're doing this, we're talking through this, giving us insight. And as our program starts, I pair the parents with the players because, man, it doesn't matter how much I know. I'm going to ask you 10 times more questions than you're ever going to ask me. So that's it. Again, it's just a guided discovery process.
Yep. I remember I talked to you about, because I had heard in the past, let's try and separate the parents from their kids, let the kids kind of take ownership and all that. And I kind of had asked you about it, and you said just that you pair them together because, I mean, they got to have someone to reference to. Can you talk a little bit more about why you empower the parent just as much as the kid?
Yeah, because the power here's the crazy thing about it. And this goes back to a lot of different things, but we get so overloaded with information that there's no way to differentiate what's good science, what's bad science, who knows what. We don't know who to trust, who to believe. So a lot of parents think, hey, I'm going to mess my son up. I don't want to do that. So they'll pay somebody else to mess them up instead. When the ultimate power is that the one who's got the most power is the parent, because you know your kid better than anybody else. What drives him? What holds him back? What does he believe in? How can I motivate him? That's really, because when you think about it, we're just kind of pulling the strings with the puppet. The other guy, he can read out a data sheet. He can read out, hey, he doesn't have hip-shoulder separation, but still, that's not going to tell you why. More often than not, you know more of a why than the instructor, because you know the person that's driving the action. And then two, it's kind of to eliminate the father-son and some of that, that madness that you see, because the worst thing a parent can do or a coach can do is tell somebody how to do something. It's just more of asking, well, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? So I just give them a little simple process just to kind of steering down the road of just asking questions. But, the coolest part about that is that if the player messes it up, it's not the parents' fault. They're the ones that came up with it to start with. So it really holds the player accountable and responsible and takes it to a different level with that. And then just understanding, hey, this can be fun together, man. I don't have to have a PhD in science to be able to even talk pitching mechanics.
Yeah. So to segue to the next topic, again, talking with, when you work with guys for instruction, something that I've always heard you talk about is breathing. So why is breathing so important, and where do you see breathing go wrong with a lot of guys?
They don't practice it. You think about this, and me and Alan Jay are a good friend of mine. What is the advice that we give to a pitcher in the bottom of the ninth when everything's on the line? And just breathe, relax. Why? If it's that important, it's at the end of the game at that time, don't you think we should practice it? But no, we just assume, hey, I'm 40 years old. I know how to breathe. And then again, too, people don't realize how the role that breathing plays. It's one, we can say it's mental, it's for clarity, it's for focus. But two, it's also physical, because you think about how it affects mobility. And anytime that I'm a poor breather, it's going to create stiffness in the system. Anytime I'm a poor breather, it sends an alert to the brain that, hey, something else is wrong. And then as far as once I can breathe, I have higher levels of body awareness, proprioception. Because I have that, I'm able to coordinate movements. I'm freer, I'm able to move. And then you think about with mobility, whenever a guy gets knocked out in the UFC, notice how much mobility that guy has all of a sudden because of the brain's turned off and it's able to move through certain ranges like that. So anytime that you can reduce the threat for the brain, it's just going to allow you to move much more efficiently. And again, man, to me, it's the invisible bridge between the mental and the physical game. Breathing is. It's just something we do every day. And just notice time and time again, your stiffer movers are typically your weaker breathers as well.
Yeah. I remember sitting in the room with Alan Jaeger running us through a little bit of a breathing routine and meditation back in, it was either 2016 or 17. And one of the guys afterward spoke up and said, I think he was in his 50s, maybe 60s. And he said, never in his life had he just taken a second to just breathe. And that was it. He said his mind was always going. He just, whether focused or unfocused, is just he'd never stopped and just relaxed and just taken a breath, and that's all he focused on. And he said it was life-changing for him. It blew everyone away, and it was fantastic. So what's your best advice for guys to train that, to work on it?
That's a good question. Couple ways. Number one, man, one of my favorite pitching drills is a breathing drill. It's just a body scan. And what I'm doing there, I'm just laying on my back, and as I'm breathing in through my nose, and I'm thinking about breathing just through my diaphragm, just underneath my rib cage, breathing through. So a way to test that is hold your hand on your chest, and then at the top of here, and then one there on your diaphragm. breathe correctly to where you don't feel the top hand move, and then breathe incorrectly so you can start to tell the difference. But with the body scan, we're just going to go through each body part. As I inhale, I'm going to put tension on that particular body part. As I exhale, I'm going to release it. So I'm basically just going through each of the, it's like I'm labeling puppet strings. And so I know where each body part is, because I don't know where those are. It's going to be pretty difficult to move. You never see a piano player icing his fingers before he played. So kind of works that way too. But yeah, that's a big one. And just breathing is a daily part, because man, it's life-changing from both a performance and just daily activities, man. I couldn't do without it.
Yeah, that's a good take on. So you've already touched on a little bit, and you talked about it there with kind of feeling each segment of your body. So one of the biggest things that you're known for is that you're the feel guy. When you talk about feel and feel versus real and proprioception, like first person that comes to mind is Lantz Wheeler. So talk to me about feel and proprioception.
Man, that's a great question, because you know what? I think as a pitching culture, we really, really throw feel out of context, because feel has so many different ways that you can use it. It can be a physical feeling. I can touch a hot stove. It can be an emotional feeling. It can be, hey, how do you feel about that? But most often people say, oh, well, they're either with it or they say, oh, it just feels good. They think of it as perception. But really, to me, man, feel is, one, we'll talk about proprioception, but the other side of that is an association. Basically, it's like the reason that I can type. Why can players struggle with pitching lessons, but they can go in and type? It's because they have the quality of practice. They're starting to say something as they're typing, they're writing it down. They're getting the immediate feedback on the screen. They see the red line. So pretty soon you take a simple goal with focus and intention, and you surround it with what you're saying, what you're seeing. You can feel the space keys, the keys on this keyboard, millimeters apart, but yet you can't feel the difference between 2 feet between a ball and a strike out here. So it comes back to a lot of that. But association really and feel, what we're trying to do, it's just like when you're driving. You don't have to think about it. Why? Because the speedometer serves as the data. You're getting the readout. You know when to adjust. Through trial and error, you start to create a feel of the difference between 35 and 90. You just know that because it's that learned association. But one of the biggest issues or areas I see in mechanics is just lack of proprioception. So with proprioception, that's like a sense of self. It's kinesthetic awareness. There's a lot to it, but if I put it this way, it might make a little bit more sense. If I handed you a puppet, a marionette puppet that had thousands of strings to it, I said, hey, Scott, make this thing dance. You'd be like, man, come on, really? So if I said, no, here, I want you to take this puppet, I want you to learn to make it dance. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to check the strings, where does each string go to? So as my brain sees movement, it sees it like a map. It's got a map laid out. This side is the fingers, this side is the head, this is the nose, this is the arm. So it's going through it because that's how we're able to close our eyes and touch our nose. And then you think about what's going on with the calculations to close my eyes and not just slam it. How does the body know to barely put enough force to barely touch your nose? But as you're labeling those strings to the map, that would be proprioception. Hey, I know where my trap is. Hey, I know where my glute is. Because so many players don't. And here's something too, I had a thought earlier. Remember those old school those old school keyboards, typewriters?
Yeah.
And you remember how if you pushed one letter, 2 letters might type the same? They would stick. The keys would stick. So if I pushed one on an old typewriter, the keys would fire. So if I pushed G, Y, I, and G might all just show up on the paper and they would get stuck together. So that got me thinking about like with body awareness. And then my little girl says, we were at the playground and she says, hey, I've got to go tell my friends bye. How many do you have? I've got 1, 2. As far as her body saw it, her proprioception was that the hand was all just one piece. It wasn't separated because she'd never used it. Up to this point, she just grasped enough. She didn't have to count. So with the typewriter, it was the same way. So if you think about like with a typewriter and you looked at movements in this way, is that right in front of my Mac computer right now, I see all the different letters. Those would be like the muscle groupings. If I know where each letter is, I've got pretty good proprioception. I've got pretty good awareness. So if you ask me to learn a new skill besides baseball and you said, hey, it's basketball, we're still playing with the same keypad. Nothing's changed. It's still the same keypad. So I'm going to pick up on that quicker because I already know where the letters are. I know I've got the basic foundation for movement I'm aware of. So that would be proprioception. So the next stage of that from proprioception is coordination. Now you're aware of your body parts. Now you're trying to actually move them, because coordination problems are usually proprioception problems, because it's hard to feel, it's hard to move something if you can't feel it, right? So that's how we're looking at it with that. And so if you're looking at the keypad, number one, the muscle firings or activations would be single letters. Then as you start to type letters into a string, now you've got words. Those would be the actual movements. Then we take those words or movements and we form it into a sentence, which would be a sequence. Then we put enough sequences together. Now that starts to tell a story of movement. And really, if you looked at most players' story, because they had the mislabeled keys or they weren't aware, there's going to be spaces, there's going to be errors everywhere. So the more fluent or movement intelligent somebody is, the faster they're going to be able to make transition from skill to skill, make adjustments, and then their story is going to just be a little bit more efficient than the others.
Yeah. So where do you think coaches or instructors go wrong, that you can have an 8-year-old who you might say, he doesn't move well, he doesn't have very much feel? Well, he's 8-year-old. And then you got a 28-year-old who doesn't move well, doesn't have feel, and you say, well, what happened? Where's the fallout?
Most of the time, like with feel, it's just creating a learned awareness. It's not genetic. It's not anything like that. It's a lot. If I wanted to learn how to throw more strikes, I'm struggling with the curveball. I don't have a feel for the curveball. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce the first one on purpose. How bad can I butcher this thing? Next one, I'm going to throw it as high as I can. How bad can I throw it? Now I'm going to see if I can throw it a little bit lower. Now I'm going to see if I can throw it a little bit higher. Because all we're trying to do is give the brain defined parameters between what's right, what's wrong. So if I want to move faster, learn to move a little bit slower. If I go to my right side, I'm going to be better at my left side. Because if you really think about it, and movement has a map, and that's why I'm so behind Greg Rosen when he talks about training the opposite side of your body. I think you're a fool not to. I mean, I think it has to happen, because we talked about the brain and its map. So if I had this map right in front of me, here's my map. This would be for my dominant side of my body. My map on my left side would be a little bit blurry because I don't use it very often. So I don't have a clear map. Because I don't have a clear map, that's one of the reasons why I'm more uncoordinated with the left side of my body. So by training the left side of the body, basically what you've done is you've taken the map that was folded in half and you've given the brain an entire map to work with. Because I'm more aware of the left side of my body, now I coordinate it better. Because I coordinate it better, I'm more efficient synchronizing it and starting to optimize it. But the brain also looks at it this way too, is that anytime that I use it more, it creates a more visual, more clearer lay of the land. So it's going to move faster through that lay of the land. It's going to know where and how to move and move around. So really that's what you're doing when you're training the other side, is that map becomes more clear because your braking side, your non-dominant side becomes more efficient. It's going to allow the other side to move faster. So again, man, it all comes back where it's integrated, it's interrelated. But anytime it comes to a feel, more times than not, what I'm talking about is just the learned association for the skill. It's just like going back to driving. The data is the speedometer. The feel is the connection between what I'm being able to judge out here externally and what I can put into my body as a form of a motor skill.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years ago when you were talking about training the other side of the body, that was the most simple because with mechanics and movement, try to do this and look for this degrees and this type of cue, and is it external or internal? And you're like, what? All the things you said, train the opposite side of the body. And I was just blown away that something that simple, and that could have so for the next 5 years, every time that I tell a kid, hey, let's try to throw with your right hand, or let's try to use your hips, or even throw a medicine ball, they just want to throw it with their dominant hand in that side. And they look at me, they're just like, the opposite side. What? Just trust me.
That's right. But going back to the coaching community, big one is communication to me, man. In today's society, we look at data as the answer, and we misinterpret data too, like a research stat, analytics, a batting average, a 3D readout. It's all thrown into one bucket as if it's all the same data. To me, when it comes to player development, man, if I'm working with the individual, it's a sample size of one is the only thing I'm worried about. I'm not worrying about what the other data tells me anywhere else, because to me, data is not ever the answer. It's just an opportunity to ask a better question. So instead of looking at data, it doesn't tell you how to, but it does start to limit your brain's choices by asking, oh, so I've got that result on spin rate. What if we tried this? Because the data is going to be totally different once you introduce the what if. Another part of that is just communication. A lot of times we try to put mechanics into words. It's pretty difficult to do, but on the flip side, imagine trying to turn words into mechanics, how difficult that can be. So it's communication, because I did this, maybe it was at the certification you were at, but we asked everybody in the room, what does stay back mean? And everybody in the room raised their hand. So I said, instead of spouting it out, write it down. And then when we read it out, everybody, something as simple as stay back, everybody raised their hand and thought they knew, but yet we had 20 different answers. But the thing about the danger of that isn't the 20 different answers. The danger of that is everybody in the room was convinced they had the answer. So that's where it comes into problems. And I see the same thing with data every single day. We look, just because somebody has access to information, we don't differentiate between the x-ray tech and the doctor. We seem, because it's information, it must be real. But the information is only as quality as the interpretation. So I've got to be able to communicate. So I've got a little formula for this. I'm not a math guy. I got my bachelor's degree and associates on the same day because of college algebra. But when I look at information, I'm thinking information equals communication divided by interpretation. Because if you could have the best information in the world, but if you communicate it poorly, what good is the information? If you have good information and you interpret it completely different than it was intended, it doesn't matter. So really it comes down to the interpretation, because unless the player can understand it, it doesn't matter. And you think about it, like the videos that we analyze on screen are the pictures we paint in their mind through our communication. So one is not the other, one's not at fault, we're in this together. So by me putting pictures in your mind of what it's supposed to look like, that's what I'll eventually analyze as your mechanics on the screen, because it all starts up there.
Yeah,
so last one would be communication. Instead of giving how-to information, simply asking questions, man. What if? What are you going to try on this one? How are you going to do it different? So you're constantly holding them accountable just to up the quality of the practice, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's psychology 101 right there. I mean, it's, yeah, with our other instructors and our other coaches, it's nice because I don't come at them from a place of like, hey, I know more than you. I basically tell them, here's what I work on because it's what I do poorly and I try to get better at, and that's with communication. I see something, I want to fix it. I'm excited to help the kid. He throws a pitch, he does something wrong. Oh, I want to fix it, but I just don't allow him to figure stuff out, and I over-communicate and I over-cue and I give him all these things. Yeah, we all do it. So it's one of the biggest things that I harp on with guys because it's something that I still do to this day. So
me too. I preach it all day long, and I catch myself doing the same thing. I'm like, come on, man, get with it, get with it. But yeah, it's kind of instinct.
Yep. All right, let me see what I got here. Actually, let me check questions if I got any yet. I've got one, but it's about the belt, so we'll get to that later. Jason says, classic Lantz, golden nugget after golden nugget wrapped into great, easy to understand analogies. I mean, that should be on your resume.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's see. Movement, just in general. We talked a lot about it, but do you think it starts with the mind or the eyes?
I think it's both. I don't think it's either or.
Okay.
I think everything is integrated, man. To me, the eyes are kind of like the mind's windshield. But it's going to be both, because you got to think that a lot of times, that's a great question, because you could start to dig me into some deeper stuff, a conversation that maybe me and Alan Jager would have. But you think about, like, as people, man, we're riddled by perception. I'll give you a story, and hopefully your parents don't look at it too badly. But we were driving down the road the other day, and you talk about the mind or the eyes, and my wife says, well, let me back up a second. So we're driving down Pacific Coast Highway, and to the right is this girl in hardly anything with this bright green bikini. So that's where my eyes went, jerked back real quick. And then my wife says, hey, let me see your camera. I need to take a picture. Look at that color green. So immediately I look straight to the girl. She's talking about the green car in front of me. So a lot of times what your eyes see is what your mind chooses to see. And that could be a problem too with mechanics, because we see what we believe and we look for what we believe to see, right? So I guess that would be my deeper end of the answer. But to me, it starts with your intentions, man. You might have intentions to do something, or thoughts. Thoughts become actions. Intentions become actions. But the body's number one goal is to self-protect, man. So if I might have intentions to drive to the store, but if I see a coyote run out in front of me, I'm going to veer off. It's going to take a different path. But two, you got to think about with the eyes, it's like anytime the eyes start to wander, the body's going to move. Like I even watched this movie the other day and said, hey, when you're riding the horse, keep your eyes ahead, because as you start to look this way, your weight shifts. As your weight shifts, the horse turns. Next thing you know, you're coming off a cliff. So think about it that. We play a rotational sport, so it's like a hammock. If I'm going to be able to move through the middle, I have to anchor both sides, because the feet will affect the eyes will affect the hips. So it's all integrated there. But you know something with the eyes, we don't ever pay much attention to those. And I know why. Because if it can't be measured, it doesn't matter. It doesn't show up in a scientific bucket. It doesn't show up in a category. And that's kind of what drives me crazy, is that so much that we see with mechanics, we place the value on correlations, a mutual relationship between two things. That's what's already happened. Like it took two parties. Like it's not just that I don't have hip shoulder separation. It's something that happened before. But too often, man, we just focus on the correlations because they can be measured. They matter. Breathing can't be measured. I don't know why we would ever train a kid all day, have intent with every throw, and then you analyze the video without ever asking him, what was your intent, man? Oh, because that's going to change the whole scope of it. But yet we look at data plots and say, hey, man, that's the answer. No, it's not. Try something different. Well, tell me if it changes. It's going to change the data. But that's, again, it goes back to, we always want to use data as the answer instead of a process for asking a better question, because for so many reasons. But yeah, that's kind of my take with that.
Yeah, I'm sure you would probably agree that a better form of data would probably be note-taking. I know you harp on that a lot. So talk a little bit about note-taking, and because you as the instructor, you know, you can figure out a lot of things, get to know the guy, but at the end of the day, you know, he has to go home with that. He needs to figure out what worked for him. How important is the note-taking process?
Yeah, this goes back to the data, because really we use data every single day. We've got 4D, we've got Rapsodo, we've got Diamond Kinetics, we've got, my goodness, we use it all the time. Our whole thing and purpose with the journals is we're trying to take the numbers to create a feel for whatever it is. And so our process for that, we use FEEL as an acronym: focus, explore, eliminate, learn. So my job as a coach, I'm sitting there asking, all right, what are you going to try to do on this one? He gives it to me. No, I'm going to throw this ball down and away. No, you're not. Where are you? I'm going to throw this right inside his kneecap, right there beside that leg strap. Okay, how are you going to do it? And I'm going to ask him to narrow it down, because you think about development, Scott, it's just trial and error. We're all just throwing stuff up against the wall, figuring if it sticks. What sticks is just the data tells us if it sticks. All right, now I'm going to try something else. What's it tell me? So you hear this all the time, because you're FEEL, you're old school, you're anti-data. We can't separate the two. Data is to connect a FEEL. Ultimately, that's our goal, is to gather the information so we can make a change or an adjustment. If I'm talking about a physical movement, I have to feel it, because the brain thinks and feels the body's native language. It's not a very good translator. We've already seen what stay back can mean to 25 different people. So it comes down to creating that learned association. So what we do with the journal is that each day I ask those guys just to take a few minutes and write down, what did you learn? What did you not learn? What was your focus today? If you were the coach, what would be your plan for tomorrow? What association? So they're really just taking what they did today, they're writing it down, and then they're asking themselves, what's my plan for tomorrow? So as soon as they wake up, they know exactly what they're trying to do. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to transfer the power over to the pitchers, because it's been with the coaches for way too long.
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day when I was prepping for this. At what point, because I know you've talked about, I don't know how many journals you have, you talked about how many, It's unbelievable. I literally probably have that certification in this one notebook, because my stuff will either be scattered or on my phone or in here. And I probably don't take near enough notes nor review them. But at what point for you did that really start? Because obviously, like in school, you take notes. But at what point were you like, okay, this is something I'm going to really take full advantage of, and this is something that's really important, and I need to just go full bore at it?
It didn't even happen that way. Like everything else with me, it wasn't. The way my mind races and runs, everything I see relates to pitching. Like, it doesn't matter. It's going to come back down to something else, because that's just the way I taught myself to learn pitching. It started with the Tom House bedtime story. So, but anyway, with the journals, what I started to do was I would get so much information that I would just write down random thoughts just so I wouldn't have to remember what I was supposed to not forget. So it just allowed me to put the thought down to revisit it later. And then from there, I would just start to elaborate on the thought. And you know what the cool part about journals, man, is that you'll have this great idea, but you can't connect all the pieces. And then maybe a year from now, you'll be writing something and you're like, that's what I was trying to connect last year, but I just didn't, my understanding wasn't deep enough. I might have known what it was, but I didn't understand it deep enough to connect the two to make sense out of it. So that's one of my favorite parts. But yeah, I think I've got 382 journals now. And so they're all just, if somebody saw what was half of those, they would probably put me in an insane asylum.
Do you have one at your house right now?
Got one right here.
I want to see this.
You don't ever see anywhere where I go to where it's not.
Oh my God.
So this one is, I've got a few empty spots, but for the most part, you can see it. And it's just, like I said, it's just all just random thoughts for the most part, just fragmented thoughts. And, you know, that creates a problem too, because I've got to go back and kind of touch on this, but to me, I just like it because it's just for a brainstorming activity too. But it's amazing just how you start to look at things differently once you start to put it to paper. And to me, man, there's just something different about having to take the pen. It's almost like it etches it in my mind to where I remember it a little bit better.
That's every time you tell me, I'm like, there's no way there's that many. 382. That's unbelievable. This is more of a selfish question because it's something I've noticed over the years that I don't do well enough. And I don't know if there's a right way and a wrong way, or I think it's, individualized, but do you look back at your notes? How often do you do it? Is it a part of your routine? Is it random? Because you've got 382. That's probably more than you can ever read back through completely. But at what point are you referencing back to those? Or is it more of just a practice to get it written down and then kind of go to the next thing?
It just depends on what I'm using it for. Because like right now I'm working on a book and I went back to them religiously, but I always like to revisit them once every 3 or 4 months at least. But usually like when I have a book like this one, this is probably about a month and a half of notes. So that typically tends to be that tunnel or that time of frame of mind of where, the thoughts are usually pretty interconnected there, but then you want to dig in some rabbit holes deeper than Alice, then go over to the bookshelf. But yeah, so they usually are pretty connected there as far as the context or the content of them.
How in the world do you organize those?
I don't. Like my idea of organization is just chaos. Like Mandy, if she wants to piss me off, she will come into my office and she will literally do what you would pay somebody to do and organize your stuff, put it in a straight line. But when she does it, I can't find anything because anything in a linear format just drives me nuts and I can't find it.
That's hilarious. All right, let's see. Some other topics that I know you like to talk about or that you speak on real well. I'll go back to the hips because I think we just talk about the belt. That'll be important to talk on there. Competing in empty rooms. This is for our players. Talk about competing in empty rooms. I know you've got a T-shirt. It's one of your slogans. Competing in empty rooms. Yeah,
man, because you got to think about it, man. The best in the world. That's what they do. Like they don't turn it off. When I'm thinking about competing in empty rooms, it's so easy to go to an event or go to a game or go to a practice and do what you're supposed to because you're going to get some praise. You can get some pats on the back, but you don't want to be left out. But then when you go home, man, what are you willing to do when nobody's watching, but when you're not going to get a praise, you're not going to get a pat on the back, you're not going to get a high five? That's what separates so many players apart. So you just, again, to me, competing in empty rooms is you don't need a coach to tell you what to do. You don't need all this external motivation. You have to have that desire and that belief that I can do it. But in order to do so, I'm going to focus on controlling what I can control, man. I'm going to try to reduce the clutter. I'm going to take care of nutrition. If I can control nutrition, I'm going to sleep, hydration, thoughts. I'm going to really think about when I'm out throwing that every throw counts. I either win or I lose. There's no ties in player development. I either won that throw or I didn't. I'm going to have clear goals because it's hard to know if you made the shot if you don't know what you're shooting at. So I think a lot of players, man, did I make that? How did that feel? What's kind of hard to know when you don't even know what you were trying to do. We're just mindlessly going through these repetitions over and over. and it's just not getting us anywhere. We're not getting in tune with our body. We're not being able to connect feels or associations from the feedback to good or bad, because we're just throwing at a basket. If I were shooting basketball, it would be like a pole in the ground with no backboard, no net, no rim, and I'm just launching it. It's kind of hard to know how well I shot that day, but that's really what it comes down to is just taking control and doing today what others won't, so you can do tomorrow what others can't.
I love that, man. All right, let's jump into the core velocity belt. Again, this is not meant to be an infomercial about the core velocity belt. It's more or less to highlight, because I know a lot of the people that are watching are going to be players in organization, families in organization. It's a tool that we use, and I'd love to be able to kind of clip up some of these things as we talk about it, just to further educate them on why we're using this thing, this harness. We don't have a wall to climb, so what are we using this harness for? So I love how you tell about the story about how you came up with it. So if you can talk about that, and then we'll kind of get into like why we use this.
Another brilliant scientific finding of mine. I was a volunteer coach at Lipscomb, and I had to go pick up my little girl. She was 5 at the time. She was the one that I taught her to throw like a girl, by the way. And I had to go pick her up. So my wife's at work. She's selling cars. And so we're in the basketball gym in the middle of the winter. And so she's the kind of kid that runs around everywhere. So I've got these busy lessons. I'm like, hey, Riley, put this J-band, it was a J-band, put this J-band around you and just back up. She goes, what do you want me to do? I said, oh, no, you'll figure it out. So she comes up with that idea. She backs it up. And then she would drop on the floor with her shoes off and just slide like she was water skiing. I'm like, man, this is perfect. And I can still remember that she catches her heels, and I can see it in slow motion right now because she's blood-curdling scream to where the whole gym just stopped. And she just smashes directly into the concrete wall. And parental reaction, I turn around thinking, holy crap, she's dead, and halfway there. And this would be freaking perfect for pitching. So we went out. We went to Walmart, got a back support brace. I bought a sewing machine off of eBay. Mandy was like Cinderella. Just thing was on fire. I even walked in the house one after practice. She was throwing out the window because that thing actually caught on fire. It was smoking. It took us about 10 years to get the thing right. But, man, that's just what it was.
I've heard that story a handful of times, and that's, I don't know, it gets better every time. So what's the big, is there like, I'm trying to think how to help kind of some of our audience. We've actually got some of the players that asked about it and how to use it, or some of the program, but what's the biggest thing? I mean, I know for our guys what it is, but you're working with professional guys, you're working with young guys, what's the biggest kind of aha moment for those guys when they get that thing on and they start using it? What are they feeling?
Well, you got to think that it comes back again to, excuse me 1 second. It comes back again. The first thing that it does, man, it creates higher levels of proprioception, and proprioception would be one on this side. It's got a physical sensation to it because it pressures you. So you got to think about how the brain works, man, is that anytime there's pressure, there's vibration, there's pokes, there's touches, the brain perceives it as a threat because it's coming from something externally like that. So as it starts to compress the hips, it gets the brain's attention. So attention lets the brain know what's really important. So when I'm thinking about going back to competing in an empty room, my visual for focus and intention is why it's so important. Number one is they work like batteries. You only have so much charge. The longer I sleep, the better I eat, the more I get time for that to charge, right? So it all matters there. And so focus, if I'm in a crowded room and I were to turn out the lights, that would be focus. If I pulled out a flashlight and shined it on the wall, that would be attention. Whenever I combine focus and intention, and thoughts the room starts to quiet on its own because the brain is now zoomed in. It knows exactly what's really important. So that's really what the belt's doing. Is baseball is a rotational sport. So many players are quad dominant. They don't understand the middle of their body. So it goes back to my analogy earlier with my little girl. She had 5 friends shooting 1, 2, 3. So her whole hand was used to grip. And I watch most players, because they sit in chairs, because of their lifestyle, because of all this quad dominant teaching that you'll sometimes see, is that they have no awareness for their hips. Their hips and their quads, they're all wired together as one. So it's like that typewriting where both keys are stuck. When I hit 1, 2 keys fire. It's that Hebbian theory. So that's what I see is, number one, it just allows them the awareness to be able to feel that part. Once they take it off, They're always like, hey, I feel lighter, I feel faster. Are they? No, that's the brain, man. That's why most gains that we see are brain gains. They're not actual physical changes. It's just the brain has a clearer understanding of what's going on. So by creating that pressure through that pelvis there, it heightens awareness. Because you're more aware, you're obviously going to move better. So that's really kind of goes hand in hand with that. So we just really got 4 stages we'll go through. To me, with any sort of development, number one is mind-muscle connection, man. I've got to be able to connect mind to muscle through feel, through awareness, through focus, through attention. Because if I don't have it, like if I had a problem with my phone, I wouldn't say, hey, it's broke, man, I need to change the mechanics on my phone. I would first go look for the internet connection. Then I would check if there's a battery. I would use common sense, but I'm not talking about pitching there. I'm talking about just common sense in that situation. But first is the mind-muscle connection, man. I want to label my strings. I want to be aware. So that would be like the puppet. I know where my strings are. The next thing would be mind-muscle coordination. I'm going to start simple before complex. Less is always going to be more. And what I see with so many players is that they don't rotate very well. It's because the linear cues. It's because their eyes wander everywhere. And because they don't rotate very well, they'll often try to use their feet or their knees to turn their hips. And so whenever that does that, that's the lack of hip-shoulder separations. You'll see, and I always tell players all the time, man, if you can't separate your hips from your shoulders standing, why are you asking for a drill to do it? Because it's just really just body awareness there. So, so what we'll do is we'll start on the knees just to kind of limit the places we can go wrong by taking the feet and the knees out of it. That way they can actually feel their glutes, how they're actually turning. Then we'll put them up 2 feet. Then we just treat them like a baby. What we do, we start crawling, standing, walking, stepping, and just treating it just like that. Then the other one is just trying to synchronize the movement. Because you got to think anytime you learn something, you're going to be mindful of it as you start to go. But the ultimate goal is just to be mindless. It's like driving that car to where it's on automatic. And that's the final part is where we actually create problems. We try to challenge them out of their comfort zone. We'll try to pull them off. We'll try to do different things. And that's really just feed the mistake.
Yep. No, I love when, and I make sure our other coaches and instructors, when they use it, they do the same thing. I love when a player uses it for the first time, run them through a lot of those drills and exercises, those movements that you have and that progression. And then without having ever told them what to think, because we can kind of guide them to an answer, say, oh, did that feel good? Did that feel, to just say, how did that feel? To say, how does that feel? And the answers that they have are fantastic. And they get to learn for themselves. And I get to learn how it's going to feel for someone else, so that it makes me a better coach, and I love it.
And you touched on something that's so important, and that is never telling a player what to feel, because and that's when we get into the context of feel. I get asked all the time, well, what's the feel for this? What's the feel for that? I think most people look at it as a physical sensation. Like, I touched a hot stove, it burnt me. So what does my hips feel like? Do they burn? You know, is it a physical sensation there? And I think whenever you're starting to run into telling people what to feel and how to feel, you've instantly taken away every bit of the power that they have, and you've taken on all the power. So looking at it exactly how you said, by asking them, what did you feel? Well, I didn't really feel anything. All right, then let's try something totally different. Like, if I want to hit a golf ball straight, I'm going to practice hitting it to the right and hitting it to the left, so I know what straight feels like. And it's the same thing with the belt, but it's about asking questions 100%.
Yeah, communication is, when we were talking about it earlier, I was reminded of a few years ago, and it was probably the most epic thing I think you've done on social media, when you video and said, hey, post in the comments what you think the mechanical flaw is. How many comments or views did you get on that thing?
Oh, geez. Man, it was in the thousands.
Yeah, it might have been tens of thousands. It was unbelievable how many comments were in there, how many views. And it just kept coming. I mean, you could hit refresh and there'd be more.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah. And everybody's always going to come down to mechanics, man. Like, it's always. But you know what? You can blame science for that. I'm big on science, but it's also caused some problems too, and that it overloads us with information. We're not real sure about it. We get overwhelmed with it. But then you take somebody with a lab coat, like at ASMI, what they did, and said, hey, that hip-shoulder separation is important, all those correlations. And then they put in the biomechanical markers for what predicts pain. That created pain guys everywhere, man. Everybody predicting based on positions. It wasn't about movement any longer. It was about the positions. And we don't ever think of it being like dominoes. If I had looked at mechanics like it was dominoes, and I knocked him over, and I had one, like the seventh one standing, which is hip-shoulder separation. It didn't knock over. Well, my 4-year-old's not going to say, hey, this domino's broke. She's going to line up the one before it to fix the problem because, man, any movements you make is just a function of the previous movement. So it's all about just kind of tracking it back. So.
Yeah. All right, as we are coming to a close-ish, I wanted to talk a little bit, and the core velocity belt, I will include a link when I upload this to YouTube, just so you guys, if you want to go check it out, definitely go. Actually, I got a question from one of our players. He's in the program, and I don't know if you got the progression set up. So he had asked, where did I write it down? Do you want him going? Let me just open it up and I'll see what he said. He said, so there's a section of the core velocity belt program that you complete. Does he want us to go through the workout more than once, or do more sets of each workout, or just go through it once?
Just test it. Just follow the testing. And once you pass the testing, man, it's just picking and choosing like it's a menu.
Okay. Love it. All right, let's see. Frankie says, hi, asking about we talked about journaling. Perfect. Oh, yeah. Frankie wants to know to touch on, because this is something that you've always preached on, feeding the mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, to me, man, the quickest way to fix a problem is by creating a problem. I look at development like this. Whenever they're learning something new, it's like I'm learning to bowl for the first time. You're going to put bumper pads. Those are constraints in place, and those are in place to limit your brain's choices for going wrong. It's just like contrast. Do right versus wrong, slow versus fast, another form of contrast. So whenever they're learning something through that mindful repetition, like mindful synchronization, where we're trying to put it together, we're going to do ride the slide. We're going to do different variables around the goal just to make it easier for them to go feel right than feel wrong. But once we've got that, what we're going to do, we're always going to mix it up, because the worst thing a pitcher can do is the same thing every single time, every single day, because they get pretty good at just being okay. Because anytime that I don't have novelty or new stimuli coming in from the environment, man, I'm not going to pay attention. Just like when you drove home from work today, you probably didn't pay attention to really what's going on. I come up to California and I see all the mountains and I'm blown away. And now after living there for 2 years, how's the mountains? Man, I haven't looked at those in probably a year now. So by mixing it up, the brain craves novelty, and anytime I can grab the brain's attention, it's going to be very fruitful for me. So anytime that I start to threaten the body, like if I'm trying to get a kid keep from going to his heel, I'm actually going to slightly influence him to go more to the ball of the foot, so the brain can start to, one, differentiate, but two, if I've got a guy that say is flying open and I pull him open, what's his body going to do? His body is always looking to protect itself, so it's going to start to self-correct on its own without you even having to say anything about it. So that's really the essence of feed the mistake, is just if they're doing something wrong, help them do it even more wrong and let them fix it on their own. It's like my kids, man. They were stomping snow all through the house one winter, and I was like, hey, guys, don't do that. They didn't hear me. I said, hey, guys, no, seriously, guys, let's have a contest. I want to see who can stomp the most snow in the kitchen right underneath Mom's feet while she's cooking. Of course, they didn't do it once I gave them permission to do it. But that's with the body, man. Anytime I can threaten the body, it's always going to go back to protect mode. So anytime that I can provide contrast, right versus wrong, it just increases the brain's ability to map out movements.
Yep. So I want to go back to Pitchapalooza. You talked about it quite a bit, but I just want to highlight it again because it's something that like I said, I've been to it for the last 5 years. It's such a fantastic program. Again, this is going to sound like an infomercial, but I just want everyone to hear about it because you don't have to be a coach. You don't have to be Major League Baseball. You can be a parent. You can be just a fan of the game and go to this thing. And just tell people, how many people were there this year? How many MLB organizations were there? I mean,
yeah, I think we had, I mean, Mandy keeps count of all that stuff. I always tell her I don't want to know, but I think we had over like 800 this year. We had all but one Major League Baseball organization, and for the most part, most of those organizations brought at least 4 guys. So there's a lot of pro guys. But man, to me, baseball forever has kind of had an elitist mentality. It's that, hey, I've got this information, you don't have it. Hey, I've got access to this, you don't have it. Hey, I'm this coach, you're not. And that's a big part. That always aggravated the hell out of me. Because we're all doing this thing for the same thing, man. There's not old school, there's not new school. We're always in school. If you're not in school, quit talking about it. So with Palooza, I wanted to kind of get rid of that. That's why, unless your name has coach on the birth certificate, we're not calling you coach, man. It's Danny or Joe, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's really what it's about, is just breaking down that elitist mentality and realizing that none of us know. And we're inviting as many people that are willing to recognize and say, hey, I don't know, then you're welcome. If you know everything, then keep it to yourself.
Yep. No, I love it. It's a fantastic event. Whether it's listening to you here or following you on Twitter or at Pitchapalooza, whatever it is, I can't highly recommend just following what you're doing for everyone out there, any type of baseball or pitching fan, because the way that you're able to take such what can be perceived as a complex movement or complex skills or complex topics to discuss, you're able to put them in whether it's an analogy or just simpler terms. So you're just an amazing follow from that standpoint. So I highly recommend that. Before I get into any closing thoughts, I want to do a segment that I started last week that allows me to kind of talk to the experts and get some feedback, because our organization is always trying to get better. I'm always trying to get better. So I call it Twins Critique. So the Indiana Twins is the organization that I'm a part of. I'm on the board. I'm the pitching coordinator, so I handle all the pitching stuff. So that's why I follow a lot of Lance's information. But so what we do is we've got the two biggest important things for our organization. We've got 14 teams from 8U up to 17U, our college guys coming back. I want to pick your brain. So we, number one, preach that every coach, every instructor, every player is going to speak the same language. Like we talked about today, you might communicate that a little bit different, but that's number one important. And then number two, or 1A or 1B, is going to be that on top of the coach's certification that we've done, so everyone's talking the same language, you're also in your player fees, which relative to Indianapolis and Indiana and a lot of Midwest probably, for your player fees, which are the same cost essentially, you're getting a 20-week off-season program that includes mental training, performance training, catching, pitching, infielding, outfielding, basically everything you could find under one umbrella. And what we do find ourselves kind of not necessarily failing at, but trying to improve every year, is where can we fill up more of these buckets or those buckets? So what would be your advice or your thought process on what we're doing, and how can we make it better?
You know, without seeing it would be hard to say, but I can know from experience, as many baseball guys as I've been around, I've been in contact with, like you stood out to me. That's why I still continue to text with you, because from the very first, and I'm not trying to blow you up, man. I'm just being real with you. And the first time that I met you, I love the questions that you asked, because your questions challenged me. You were very open-minded. You knew right away that here's a guy walking into the room that has a pretty good feel for information, but doesn't know everything. And those are the guys that I like to surround myself with. So hats off to you, because, man, honestly, there's not many people. There's a lot out there, but in the scope of the whole world, you know, the baseball world, right, there's fewer than we would like. So hats off to you there. But, man, anytime you can provide that much, I know where it's coming from. To me, it's the quality of the people first that matters most to me. That's who I'd want my son working with, is the communication. But, man, you don't remember what the coach taught you. You don't remember that he increased your hip-shoulder separation by 14 degrees. You remember how he made you feel about yourself. That's number one. That's why we play the game, is to feel good. We don't play the game because we all think we're going to make millions of dollars and it's a business investment. We play the game because of how the game makes us feel about ourselves. If it didn't make us feel good, we'd be playing soccer. We'd be playing bowling. We'd be playing ping pong. So we're always going to do that. So to me, it's the environment. It's the culture. It's that human element. It's about building that relationship that matters so much, because nowadays in baseball, it's not so much like that. You know, we advertise all this stuff, but we take the human element out of it. I know with you, you're going to get the human element. As far as the rest, man, is just being growth-minded. I think that the beauty about running any type of program is that once it's over, I can start my new program. I'm constantly trying to evolve and add to it, learn from what I did wrong. And that's really the fun part about it. And that's what challenges guys too, is that it's constantly evolving. It's always one piece, always, you know, I've got to get from X to Y to Z. So when you put systems in place like that, it lays out a clear path. And whenever you've got guides like yourself, man, usually guys have a much better chance of going from the beginning of the path to the end.
Yeah. So when you run clinics, because that's a constrained time, because I know, much like myself, I talk with Jason, our president, who does hitting. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and days about pitching, never be able to fit it all in. So how have you, from maybe a couple years ago running a camp to now, said, hey, maybe I was doing a little bit too much of this or not enough, and how have you kind of adjusted?
Oh, that's
what are some things you've –
Well, one, man, like I don't ever have set time limits on my camps. We don't start until 6 p.m. that night, and I tell them, man, we could be here all night. It's just really getting a feel for the people. So we don't ever have time constraints because I don't want to bound them but have got to get this much done. We're always going by finding good starting points. Like in the first starting point for me is, are these guys buying into it? Are they – because my first goal really is, can you make 5 throws with clear intentions of what you were shooting at every single time? If you can do that, man, you're way ahead of it. Because really that's what it's going to come down to. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter what I tell you anyway. And then we'll go through just some basics. First night, we're going through video analysis. We're doing some things. We're really at that point, I'm really trying to get a feel for the individuals and what they do. And I'm taking notes the whole time. Then the second day, we'll introduce mechanics. We'll introduce whatever the section might be. It's going to be the belt. It's going to be mechanics. It's going to be moving. And during that point, we're just really keeping it simple, man, and understanding the quality of practice. Like, watch your eyes. We're videotaping where your eyes go, what your feet are doing. Do you have clear intentions? And you got to think about it. Everything that you see in mechanics is a product of what happened before you analyze the mechanics. Like everything in science tells us to look at what's going on after the foot lands, and then it's hip shoulder, then it's front leg, then it's elbow, then it's, man, all that crap's already happened. Those are reactions. They've already happened. If I can clean up what's causing those, their thoughts, their quality of practice, their feedback to make adjustments, their feet, their eyes, number one, it's super easy for them. But number two, just by doing that, they start to see results right away. Because they see results, they feel good about it. Because they feel good about it, they're more interested in it. Because they're more interested, there's higher participation. But another part of that too, man, is I make it clear to the parents that, you know, kids aren't afraid to fail, man. They're not. I watched that through my kids doing typing and some other things. Is kids aren't afraid of, they're afraid to be criticized of failing, and they'll avoid that at all costs. That's the biggest part, is that idea of, hey, he's afraid to, they'll try anything, man, as long as they're not being made fun of it or being told that it's wrong or right. And that's what we do a lot of times with movement, is we want a definitive answer. It's either right or it's wrong. No, it's not. It's different for everybody. So that's what I'm really trying to get across. And then on Sunday, what we do is I want to see what they do on their own. So I sit back and watch the first 30 minutes, because that gives me a good idea of, number one, what was important to them. Number two, what's their process for doing it. Number three, what's their quality? What questions are they asking? What are they trying to do? And then from there, it helps me to just guide it from there forward. But really, man, it comes down to the inputs that we're really focused on, because I know if you clean up the inputs, man, the outputs are always going to be better.
Yep. Is there anything that you thought, oh, we used to do this way too much, and now we don't do a lot of it anymore?
Yeah, man. Heck yeah, we used to do a lot of drills, man. It's to the point now that I'm just not a big believer in drills. I think it's helpful for some. Now, I'm not ever trying to paint this whole thing with a broad paintbrush. But to me, I think a lot of players think drills are the answers to mechanics. I think that everybody thinks mechanics are physical. It's like we can cut the head off and we're coaching headless horsemen. We don't need the mind. We don't need the body, because we got pitching drills. I think that's what happens. And so players are conditioned to think that. They're conditioned to think that, hey, my velocity's down, it's my mechanics. Hey, my arm hurts, it's my mechanics. Why? Because as coaches, like myself, I've done it my entire career, and I still have to fight myself every single day, is that we focus so much on the physical part. We focus so much on the mechanics. We start to gather science. Science is only dealing with correlations as far as what to happen, because the foot's not measured as far as stability. The eyes aren't measured. Thoughts, intentions, emotions, nervous system, none of that stuff's ever included in the information that we're constantly being fed through social media. So it doesn't matter. So with the correlations, I don't worry about that stuff. So to me, man, it's about their process, their quality of work, and controlling what they can control.
I'm glad to hear you're doing kind of the same thing that we're doing, less and less mechanics, because I'm just finding out more and more through, again, trial and error, and just learning more about the body and movement, and just awareness that if you can get a guy more aware of what he's doing, tighten up some things, or even just introducing him to normal movement patterns, I mean, so many things get cleaned up without ever having to confuse them about some random drill. So that's great to hear.
Like one of my favorite ways is, like, forever, like you'll see guys that say, well, I need a good lower body drill. And what I used to do with pitch mechanics masterminds, I had 5 drills, and I thought they were the answer to every freaking mechanical problem. So I thought, thinking, man, if these are the answer to the problem, why am I still seeing problems? Like, come on, Lance, get with it. So imagine a medical society says, hey, man, come in here and get these $15,000 MRI, and then they hand you over-the-counter drugs or drills that you could have taken and not even needed it because it was the same for everybody because I was guilty of that. That's what I did. So I started thinking about like how I learned from my little boy, and one of the fast ways I've seen to teach somebody to use the legs is pick out a spot on the wall, make that spot rise. Because they try to make the spot rise, they're having the force to get into the ground. So we call them sensory apps, where we're just doing little things like that. If I've got a guy that's moving too slow, we might take a little digital metronome and click it to his neck so it's clicking faster, slower, so he has to practice fast, slow, and then he just starts to get a feel. So a lot of times we're just kind of shaping the environment around it just to get to the desired result that we want. Like for example, command. You want to improve command, pick the spot that you're struggling with, put a louder sound that if it's down and away, put a loud banging sound, go up and in, because any type of that feedback really works. But the thing about it is that it's an external focus. Anytime that I can create an external focus with players at your level like that, and I'm trying to challenge the drill to be better, then usually the body's just going to maximize its efficiency and work cleaner anyway.
Yeah. I love that. I got some follow-up questions I'm going to ask you after we get off of here. But any closing thoughts? Anything that you really want to push out there that you're just, or something that's top of mind that you want to talk about or anything?
No, man, for the most part, I think you killed it, man, with the questions.
I appreciate it. Where can people follow you?
Oh, you can follow me at Twitter at Lantz Wheeler. That's Lantz Wheeler. Instagram, still not very proficient Instagram. It is Core Velocity Belt is what that is. And there you go, man. Those are the two. I'm mostly on Twitter most of the time. I'm still trying to figure out Instagram.
Yep. All right. So for those of you who are still watching, tuning in right now, I'm really excited for next week as well. So ending this week on an incredibly high note for me personally, from the pitching side, from a guy that I consider a mentor to me. And then next week, we've got my buddy I played ball with, who's a mental performance coach for the Tampa Bay Rays. We've got Kyle Bodie coming on with Cincinnati Reds. We've got Randy Sullivan of the Florida Baseball Ranch. So an exciting week next week for those of you. We'll stick to as best we can, 8:30 Eastern time as well, in the same spot, same place. Again, we'll get this uploaded to YouTube. I've got time stamps in the videos. So if there's a topic that you guys are kind of looking for when you go back into this, I'll have those time stamped in there, the questions that we ask and all that to help you out. So Lance, really appreciate it. Everyone else appreciate it. And hopefully see you next week.